When my grandson was born, the security guard stopped me. "Your daughter-in-law only authorized close family." I replied, "All right, take the day off." What she didn't know was that I owned the hospital. An $8 million inheritance only in her dream. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I stood there in the sterile hallway of Mercy General, clutching the small blue teddy bear I'd picked out weeks ago. My hands were shaking, though I told myself it was just excitement. After all, this was my first grandchild. Darren's first child. The continuation of our family line. The security guard, a young man with kind eyes, looked genuinely apologetic. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Mrs. Kaya Martinez was very specific about the visitor list. Only immediate family members are allowed in the maternity ward today. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "I'm Leona Martinez. I'm the baby's grandmother." He checked his clipboard again, running his finger down the list. "I don't see your name here, ma'am. Would you like me to call up to the room?" "Please do that." I watched as he dialed the extension, my heart hammering against my ribs. This had to be a mistake, some clerical error. Kaya wouldn't deliberately exclude me from meeting my own grandson, would she? "Mrs. Martinez?" "Yes, there's a Leona Martinez here to see the baby." He paused, listening. "I see. Yes, ma'am. I'll let her know." When he hung up, his expression had changed. There was pity there now, mixed with discomfort. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Martinez. She said only the people on the approved list can visit today. Maybe you could try calling first next time." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. My daughter-in-law had deliberately excluded me from meeting my grandson, not forgotten to add my name, not overlooked me in the excitement, deliberately excluded me. "I understand," I said quietly, setting the teddy bear on the reception desk. "Could you please make sure this gets to the baby? It's from his grandmother." The guard nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Of course, ma'am." I turned and walked toward the elevator, my back straight despite the humiliation burning in my chest. 37 years I'd been coming to this hospital. 37 years since I'd inherited it from my late husband, Charles. I knew every hallway, every room number, every staff member by name. But today, I was just another visitor being turned away. The elevator ride down felt endless. When the doors opened on the ground floor, I saw familiar faces. Dr. Peterson from cardiology nodded respectfully. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Martinez." Nurse Williams from pediatrics smiled warmly. "How are you today?" I managed polite responses, but inside I was reeling. These people knew who I was. They knew I could have that security guard replaced with a single phone call. They knew I could have walked into any room in this hospital without question. But Kaya didn't know. And more importantly, neither did my son. I made it to my car before the tears came. Sitting in the parking lot of my own hospital, I cried like I hadn't cried in years. Not since Charles died and left me to run this place alone. Not since Darren announced he was marrying Kaya and I'd bitten my tongue about my reservations. My phone buzzed. A text from Darren. "Baby's here. 7 lbs 3 Oz. We named him James after Kaya's father." Everything went perfectly. No mention of me. No invitation to meet my grandson. No acknowledgement that I might want to be part of this moment. I stared at the hospital building through my tears. This massive complex that bore my family name, that employed over 3,000 people, that served this entire community. I had power here, real power. I could have had Kaya's visitor restrictions overridden in 5 minutes, but what would that accomplish? Force my way into a room where I wasn't wanted? Meet my grandson under a cloud of conflict? Start a war with my daughter-in-law on the day her child was born? No. If Kaya wanted to play games, I'd let her. But she was about to learn something about the woman she'd chosen to cross. I wiped my eyes and started the car. There was work to do, phone calls to make, decisions that had been a long time coming. The drive home to my estate took 20 minutes, but my mind was already racing ahead. Kaya thought she held all the cards because she had my son and my grandson. She thought I was just another aging mother-in-law to be managed and marginalized. She was wrong on both counts. That evening, I sat in my study looking at the family photo on my desk. Darren was 12 in the picture, gap-toothed and grinning after winning his first tennis tournament. Back when it was just the two of us against the world. Back when I was his hero instead of his burden. When had that changed? When had I become someone to be hidden away, managed at arm's length? When had my love become something my own son was ashamed of? I thought about all the times I'd bitten my tongue over the past 3 years. The way Kaya would answer Darren's phone when I called. The way family gatherings suddenly became intimate dinners for two. The way my opinions were politely dismissed, my suggestions gently ignored. I'd told myself it was normal. Young couples needed their space. I didn't want to be one of those interfering mothers-in-law, but today had shown me the truth. This wasn't about space or boundaries. This was about control. And Kaya had just overplayed her hand. My phone rang. Darren's number. Mom? I heard there was some confusion at the hospital today. Confusion. That's what he was calling it. No confusion, sweetheart. Just a misunderstanding about visiting hours. How are you feeling? How's the baby? We're all doing great. James is perfect. Kaya's a little tired, but the doctors say everything went smoothly. He paused. Listen, maybe we could arrange a visit next week. Once we're settled at home? Next week, after every other person on Kaya's approved list had already met my grandson. After the first photos were taken, the first stories told, the first moments shared. Of course, I said. Whatever works best for your family. Thanks for understanding, Mom. You know how it is with new babies. Kaya's just being extra careful about germs and stress and all that. Germs and stress. As if I were some sort of contamination risk. I understand completely, I said. And I did. Better than he knew. After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat back in my chair. Tomorrow, I would begin making some changes. Subtle ones at first. The kind that wouldn't be noticed until it was too late to stop them. Kaya thought she'd won today. She'd successfully kept the troublesome mother-in-law away from her perfect moment. She'd established who was really in control of this family. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated her opponent. And now the real game was about to begin. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The humiliation at the hospital had stripped away the last of my denial. I could no longer pretend that Kaya's behavior toward me was just normal daughter-in-law boundary setting. I made my coffee and sat down at my kitchen table, forcing myself to really examine the past 3 years. To stop making excuses and see the pattern for what it was. It had started small, so small I'd dismissed it as wedding stress. Leona, don't you think the guest list is getting a bit long? Kaya had said during one of our planning meetings. Maybe we should keep it to people who are really close to Darren and me. I'd watched as she systematically eliminated my friends from the list. People who'd known Darren since he was born. People who'd supported our family through Charles's illness and death. One by one, they were deemed not essential. When I gently pushed back, suggesting we keep my oldest friend Margaret on the list, Kaya had sighed dramatically. Of course, if having your friends there is more important to you than keeping our wedding intimate and meaningful. The guilt trip was expertly delivered. I'd backed down immediately, not wanting to be the difficult mother-in-law, not wanting to start my relationship with my son's wife on the wrong foot. Then came the honeymoon. They'd planned 2 weeks in Europe. A trip I'd offered to help pay for as a wedding gift. But somehow, the 2 weeks had stretched to 3, then 4. Important business meetings I'd hoped Darren would attend were missed. Family dinners were canceled. We're having such an amazing time, Mom, he'd said during one of our brief phone calls. Kaya says this might be our only chance to really travel before we start thinking about kids. When they finally returned, something had changed. Darren was different, more distant. More likely to deflect when I asked about his plans or his feelings. More likely to say, I'll have to check with Kaya before committing to anything. I'd told myself it was natural. He was married now. His wife came first. That's how it should be. But then came the family traditions that suddenly needed updating. Christmas morning had always been sacred in our family. Darren and I would open presents together, make Charles's famous cinnamon rolls, and then spend the day cooking an elaborate dinner. It was our time. Just the two of us, carrying on the traditions his father had loved. Actually, Mom, Darren had said that first Christmas as a married couple, Kaya and I were thinking we'd like to start our own traditions. Maybe we could do Christmas Eve with you instead. Christmas Eve, the night before the real celebration, the consolation prize. I'd agreed, of course, but Christmas Eve dinner felt hollow. Kaya spent most of it on her phone, posting carefully curated photos of their perfect holiday. When I'd suggested we take a family photo together, she'd declined. "I'm not really photogenic right now," she'd said, though she looked stunning as always. Maybe next time. There was never a next time. Somehow, there was always a reason why family photos weren't convenient, why traditions needed to be modified, why plans had to change. The phone calls became less frequent. Darren used to call me every Sunday, just to check in and chat about his week. But after the marriage, those calls dwindled. When I'd mention missing our conversations, he'd say, "I've been busy, Mom. You understand." When I'd try calling him directly, Kaya would often answer, "Oh, hi Leona. Darren's in the shower. Can I take a message? He's at the gym. I'll tell him you called. He's having a guys' night. Maybe try tomorrow?" The messages rarely seemed to reach him. Or if they did, the return calls came days later, hurried and distracted. I started keeping track without realizing it. 3 weeks between calls, a month, 6 weeks. Each time I reached out, I was made to feel like I was being demanding, clingy, unable to respect their space as a couple. The final straw should have been Thanksgiving. Our family. Thanksgiving had always been a big affair. I'd invite colleagues from the hospital, neighbors, anyone who might not have family nearby. Charles had loved playing host, and after he died, it became my way of honoring his memory. "Actually, Mom," Darren had said, "Kaya's been feeling overwhelmed lately. The doctor says she needs to avoid stress. Maybe we could just do something small this year? Just the 3 of us?" I'd agreed immediately, concerned about Kaya's health. But when Thanksgiving came, they canceled at the last minute. "Kaya's not feeling up to it," Darren had explained. Rain check? I'd spent Thanksgiving alone for the first time in 30 years. But that evening, I'd seen the photos on Kaya's social media. She looked radiant, laughing at a beautifully set table surrounded by her family. Not too stressed or overwhelmed to celebrate, just too stressed to celebrate with me. That's when I should have realized what was happening, but I'd made excuses even then. Maybe Kaya's family was easier for her. Maybe she felt more comfortable there. Maybe I was reading too much into things. The excuses became harder to maintain as the isolation intensified. Birthdays were acknowledged with brief phone calls. Mother's Day became a text message. When I'd try to make plans with Darren alone, lunch, tennis, anything, he'd hesitate. "I should probably check if Kaya has anything planned," he'd say. Or, "Why don't we make it dinner for 3 instead?" 3 years of this. 3 years of my world growing smaller and smaller while I told myself I was being reasonable, understanding, supportive. 3 years of watching my son disappear behind the wall his wife had built around him. I thought about the other women at the hospital auxiliary meetings, the ones who complained about their daughters-in-law. I'd always felt superior to them, proud that I wasn't one of those interfering mothers-in-law who couldn't let go. But now I understood. It wasn't that they couldn't let go. It's that they'd recognized what I'd been too naive to see. They were being systematically erased from their children's lives. And yesterday, at the hospital, Kaya had made her strategy crystal clear. I wasn't family anymore. I was an outsider to be managed, controlled, and when necessary, excluded entirely. I finished my coffee and walked to my study. On my desk was a photo from Darren's college graduation. The 3 of us, me, Charles, and Darren, beaming with pride. Charles had died just 2 months later, and for a while, it had drawn Darren and me closer together. We'd leaned on each other through the grief. But now, looking at that photo, I realized something else. Charles would never have tolerated what I'd been accepting. He would have seen through Kaya's manipulation from day one. He would have protected our family, our relationship with our son. I'd failed in that duty. I'd been so afraid of being labeled a difficult mother-in-law that I'd allowed my son to be stolen from me piece by piece, but I was still here. Still his mother. Still the woman who'd built an empire in this town and raised a good man, despite losing her husband too young. Kaya thought she'd won. She thought she'd successfully isolated Darren from his mother's influence. She thought she was in control now. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I opened my laptop and began making a list. Phone numbers I hadn't called in months. People I needed to reconnect with. Strategies that would require patience but deliver results. The war for my son's heart was far from over. It was just beginning. The first call I made was to Margaret Thornton, my oldest friend and the former head of human resources at the hospital. Margaret had retired 5 years ago, but she still knew everyone worth knowing in this town. "Leona, darling," she said, her voice warming immediately. "I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up? I heard about the baby." "That's actually why I'm calling, Margaret. I need a favor." "Anything. You know that." I chose my words carefully. "I need to know more about Kaya's background, her family, her education, her work history, discreetly." There was a pause. Margaret had worked in HR long enough to read between the lines. "What kind of concerns are we talking about?" "The kind that might affect my grandson's future," I said quietly. "I'll make some calls," Margaret said without hesitation. "Give me 48 hours. The next call was to Dr. Patricia Reeves, my personal physician, and someone I'd known since medical school. Patricia had always been direct with me, sometimes brutally so. "Patricia, I need to ask you something confidential. What do you know about Kaya Martinez, your daughter-in-law?" "Not much professionally. She's not my patient." "Why?" "She's been claiming health issues that require her to avoid stress, avoid family gatherings. Yesterday she used her health as a reason to bar me from meeting my grandson." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Leona, you know I can't discuss specific medical information even if I had it. But I can tell you that I haven't heard anything through the medical community about any serious health concerns, and you know how word travels among doctors in this town." It was enough. If Kaya had genuine health issues requiring stress avoidance, Patricia would have heard something through the network of physicians who all seemed to know each other's business. My third call was to James Morrison, the private investigator who'd helped me with some delicate business matters over the years. James was expensive, but he was thorough and, more importantly, discreet. "Mrs. Martinez, it's been a while. How can I help you?" "I need a comprehensive background check. Financial records, employment history, social media analysis, references, everything you can find legally." "Who's the subject?" "My daughter-in-law." James didn't ask why. He'd been in business too long to be surprised by family drama among wealthy clients. "I'll need her full name, date of birth, and any other identifying information you have." I gave him everything I knew, which wasn't much. Kaya had always been vague about her past, and I'd been too polite to pry. Another mistake I was beginning to regret. "How deep do you want me to go?" James asked. "As deep as necessary. I want to know who she really is." While I waited for results, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I started with social media, something I'd always avoided, but now seemed essential. Kaya's Instagram was a carefully curated collection of lifestyle photos, beautiful meals, designer clothes, exotic vacation spots. But as I scrolled through 3 years of posts, patterns emerged. Every expensive item, every vacation, every luxury experience was dated after her relationship with Darren began. Before that, her posts were sparse and far more modest. A small apartment, chain restaurants, complaints about work stress. The transformation was dramatic and telling. I also noticed something else. In 3 years of posts, I appeared in exactly 0 photos, not one. Even at events where I'd been present, the camera angles were carefully chosen to exclude me. At their engagement party, she'd posted dozens of photos with family and friends. I'd been at that party, had even given a speech. But according to Kaya's version of that night, I might as well have been invisible. It was a level of deliberate exclusion that went beyond normal social media editing. This was systematic erasure. Margaret called back within 24 hours, faster than promised. "Leona, we need to meet in person. Can you come to the club?" We met at the country club where we'd been members for over 2 decades. Margaret had already secured a private dining room, away from curious ears. "What did you find?" I asked as soon as we were seated. Margaret opened a slim folder. Kaya Rodriguez. She was using her maiden name professionally until the marriage. She worked as a sales associate at Nordstrom for 2 years before meeting Darren. Before that, she was at Macy's for 8 months. Before that, a series of short-term retail jobs. What about her education? This is where it gets interesting. She claims on her social media to have a degree in marketing from State University. I had a friend in their alumni office do some checking. No record of a Kaya Rodriguez graduating in marketing, or any other field. I felt my stomach tighten. What about family? Her parents live in a modest apartment across town. Her father works construction when he can find it. Her mother cleans houses. Nice people from what I hear, but definitely not the affluent background she's implied to your son. Margaret pulled out another sheet. Here's the concerning part. I spoke to 3 of her former employers. All of them mentioned the same thing. She had a pattern of forming relationships with wealthy, older customers. At Nordstrom, there was an incident with a customer who complained that Kaya had somehow gotten access to her personal information and was using it to build a friendship. Management had to intervene. My hands were trembling slightly as I processed this information. What kind of intervention? The kind that usually leads to termination, though officially she resigned. The manager I spoke to was careful about what she said, but reading between the lines, Kaya was targeting wealthy women for what appeared to be financial gain. I thought about all the times Kaya had complimented my jewelry, my clothes, my home, how she'd asked detailed questions about the hospital, about our family's financial history, how she'd steered conversations toward topics like inheritance and estate planning. I'd thought she was just trying to get to know me better. Now I wondered if she'd been conducting reconnaissance. There's more, Margaret continued. I also reached out to some people in the social services community. Kaya's name came up in connection with an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, who died about 6 months before Kaya met Darren. What kind of connection? Mrs. Chen had no family, and in her final months, she became very close to a young woman who helped her with shopping and errands. That woman convinced Mrs. Chen to change her will, leaving everything to her instead of the charity Mrs. Chen had originally planned to benefit. I felt cold. Was that woman Kaya? The name was different, but the description matches, and the timing is right. This all happened just before Kaya started working at Nordstrom, where she met the customer who complained about her. How much money are we talking about? Margaret consulted her notes. Mrs. Chen's estate was worth about $40,000. Not a fortune, but enough to support someone for a while if they were careful. $40,000. Enough to fund a new wardrobe, a better apartment, the kind of lifestyle changes that would make someone more attractive to wealthy men like my son. Margaret, I need you to keep this information confidential for now. Of course, but Leona, you need to be careful. If what I suspect is true, Kaya isn't just a gold digger. She's a professional. I drove home with my mind racing. Everything was falling into place, and the picture wasn't pretty. Kaya hadn't fallen in love with my son. She'd selected him. She'd researched our family, understood our wealth, and positioned herself perfectly to capture his heart, and eventually, his inheritance. The isolation campaign against me wasn't personal. It was strategic. I was the obstacle between her and complete control over Darren's life and finances. That evening, James Morrison called with his preliminary report. Mrs. Martinez, I've got some interesting findings. Your daughter-in-law has been busy since the wedding. What kind of busy? She's been meeting regularly with estate planning attorneys, different firms, asking questions about spousal inheritance rights, challenging wills, what constitutes elder abuse in inheritance disputes. My blood ran cold. Elder abuse? She's been asking specifically about situations where elderly parents might be deemed incompetent to make financial decisions, what it takes to get power of attorney, how to challenge existing wills. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Kaya wasn't just planning to inherit Darren's share of my estate when I died. She was exploring ways to take control while I was still alive. James, I need you to document everything. Every meeting, every consultation, every question she's asked. I may need this information later. Already on it. Mrs. Martinez, I have to ask. Are you in any physical danger? I thought about that question seriously. I don't think so, but I think my autonomy might be. I'll keep digging. And Mrs. Martinez, Be very careful who you trust with this information. If she's as calculating as she appears, she won't react well to being exposed. After I hung up, I sat in my study staring at the family photos that lined the walls. Pictures of 3 generations of Martinezes built around love, trust, and genuine care for each other. Kaya had infiltrated that legacy with surgical precision. She'd studied us, understood our weaknesses, and exploited them perfectly. My desire to be a supportive mother-in-law, Darren's need to please his wife, our family's tendency to avoid conflict. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed I was just another elderly mark to be manipulated and controlled. She was about to learn the difference between being old and being weak. And in this family, that was a lesson that could cost everything. Armed with the truth about Kaya, I knew I had to be strategic. Direct confrontation would only push Darren further away and give her ammunition to paint me as the unstable mother-in-law she'd been setting me up to be. Instead, I needed to let her own actions expose her true nature. My first move was quiet but significant. I called my attorney, Robert Chambers, and scheduled a meeting. "Robert, I need to make some changes to my estate planning. Immediately." Robert had been handling my legal affairs for 15 years. He knew better than to ask unnecessary questions when I used that tone. "What kind of changes, Leona?" "I want to establish a trust for my grandson with very specific conditions, and I want to revise the inheritance structure for Darren." We spent 3 hours going through the details. The new trust would provide for James's education and health care, but it would be managed by an independent trustee until he turned 30. More importantly, neither Darren nor Kaya would have access to the principal. For Darren's inheritance, I created a similar structure. He would receive income from the trust, but the assets themselves would be protected from any potential claims by spouses or creditors. "This is quite a departure from your previous will," Robert observed carefully. "Yes, it is. I've become aware of some concerns about potential undue influence. I want to protect my family's assets for future generations." Robert nodded. He'd seen enough wealthy families torn apart by manipulation to understand without needing details. My second move was to begin rebuilding my relationship with Darren, but without triggering Kaya's defensive systems. I needed to be patient, subtle, and seemingly unthreatening. I started by sending gifts for the baby. Not expensive items that might seem like I was trying to buy my way back in, but thoughtful, personal things. A hand-knitted blanket from the woman who'd made Darren's baby clothes. A silver rattle that had belonged to my grandfather. Items with family history that couldn't be easily dismissed or returned. Each gift came with a brief note expressing love for James and pride in Darren's new role as a father. No guilt trips, no demands for visits, no mention of being excluded from the hospital. The strategy worked. After a week of these gentle overtures, Darren called. "Mom, thanks for all the baby gifts. They're really thoughtful. I'm just happy to be able to contribute something to his life," I said carefully. "How are you adjusting to fatherhood?" "It's incredible. Exhausting, but incredible. He's got these tiny hands, and when he grips your finger," Darren's voice was full of wonder. "For a moment, he sounded like my son again instead of Kaya's husband. I remember that feeling when you were born," I said softly. "The way everything else just stops mattering when you're holding your baby." "Yeah, exactly. I never understood what people meant when they said having kids changes everything, but now I get it." We talked for 20 minutes about sleepless nights, diaper changes, and the way babies seem to grow overnight. It was the longest conversation we'd had in months, and notably, Kaya's name never came up. When he finally mentioned her, it was with a tone I hadn't heard before. "Kaya's having a harder time adjusting. She's pretty anxious about everything. The pediatrician says that's normal, but she's constantly worried something's going to happen to James." "That's very common with first-time mothers," I said. "Is she getting support?" "Sometimes talking to other new moms helps. She doesn't really want to join any of those mom groups. She says the other women make her feel judged." "Interesting." Kaya was isolating herself from other mothers the same way she'd isolated Darren from me. It was becoming a pattern. "Well, if she ever wants to talk to someone who's been through it, I'm here," I offered. No judgment, just experience. Darren was quiet for a moment. "I'll mention that to her." My third strategic move was to position allies in key places. I began reaching out to people in Darren's life that Kaya couldn't easily control or exclude. I called Tom Bradley, Darren's best friend from college and his best man. Tom had always been straightforward with me, and I sensed he might have his own concerns about Kaya. "Mrs. Martinez, it's great to hear from you. How are you doing?" "I'm well, Tom. I was hoping we could grab lunch soon. I feel like I haven't seen enough of Darren's friends since he got married." "Yeah, that's been different," Tom said carefully. "Darren doesn't really hang out with the old crew much anymore. I'd love to catch up with you, though. Would you be free this week? We met at a quiet restaurant downtown." Tom was diplomatic at first, but as lunch progressed, his real feelings began to emerge. "I'm worried about him, Mrs. Martinez. He's not the same guy anymore." "In what way?" Tom hesitated, then seemed to decide to trust me. "He used to be so decisive, you know. He'd make plans, stick to them, speak his mind. Now everything has to be cleared with Kaya first, and she always has a reason why things can't happen." "What kinds of things?" "Guy trips we've been planning for years. His birthday dinner. She said he was too stressed for a party. Even tennis games have to be scheduled around her needs." Tom leaned forward. "And the money thing is weird too. Darren used to be pretty generous, but not crazy about it. Now Kaya's always mentioning expensive things she wants, places she wants to travel, upgrades for the house. It's like she's constantly hinting." This aligned perfectly with what I'd learned about her background. She was escalating her financial expectations now that the baby gave her more security in the relationship. "Has Darren said anything about her family?" I asked. "That's another weird thing. She's told him these elaborate stories about her childhood, private schools, family trips to Europe. But when her parents came to the wedding, they seemed really out of place. Nice people, but definitely not the wealthy family she'd described." Tom was more observant than I'd given him credit for. And importantly, his concerns were independent of anything I might have told him. "Tom, I need to ask you something. If Darren ever needs support, someone to talk to who cares about his well-being, would you be there for him?" "Of course. But Mrs. Martinez, he's not going to come to me with marriage problems. He barely admits they exist. Just keep being his friend. And if you notice anything that concerns you about his safety or well-being, please call me." Tom studied my face. "You think he's in some kind of trouble?" "I think he's in a situation he doesn't fully understand yet. But when he does, he's going to need people who care about him for the right reasons." My fourth move was the most delicate. I needed to create opportunities for Darren to see Kaya's true nature without my fingerprints being on the revelation. I started by arranging situations where her behavior would be tested. I made a substantial donation to the Children's Hospital where Darren volunteered and suggested they honor him at their annual gala. "We'd love to have the whole family there," the development director said when she called to invite him. "Your mother specifically mentioned how proud she was of your volunteer work." I knew Kaya would hate the idea of a public event where she couldn't control the narrative or the guest list. She'd have to either attend and risk exposure to people who might question her stories, or find a way to sabotage Darren's participation. She chose sabotage. "Mom, I'm going to have to skip the hospital gala," Darren called to tell me. "James has been fussy, and Kaya doesn't think she can handle an evening event yet." "Of course, the baby comes first," I said. "Though I'm sorry the hospital will miss honoring your volunteer work." "Maybe next year." But I knew what had really happened. Kaya had manufactured a crisis to avoid an event where she'd be exposed to too many people who knew our family history. 2 days later, I got confirmation of my suspicion. Dr. Sarah Chen, James's pediatrician and someone I'd known for years, called me. "Leona, I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I wanted to check on how you're doing with the new grandfather role." "It's wonderful, though I haven't had much chance to see James yet." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "That's actually why I'm calling. Kaya brought James in yesterday for what she described as an emergency visit. She was convinced he had a fever and was having breathing problems. Was he sick? Completely healthy. Normal temperature, clear lungs, hitting all his developmental milestones perfectly. But Kaya seemed almost disappointed when I told her everything was fine. The pattern was becoming clear. Kaya was using James's health concerns as a tool for control and manipulation. The emergency that prevented the gala wasn't real. It was manufactured. "Sarah, can I ask you to keep me informed if there are any genuine health concerns with James? As his grandmother, I'd want to know. Of course. And, Leona, trust your instincts about this situation. I've seen enough new parents to know the difference between normal anxiety and something else. That night, I sat in my study updating my notes on Kaya's behavior patterns. The documentation was crucial. If this situation escalated, I'd need evidence of her manipulation and deception. But more importantly, I was beginning to see the cracks in her facade. She was making mistakes, overplaying her hand. The more secure she felt in her control over Darren, the more reckless she was becoming. James Morrison called with his weekly update. Mrs. Martinez, she's escalating. This week she had consultations with 3 different estate attorneys. She's asking increasingly specific questions about challenging mental competency determinations. What kind of specifics? How to document instances of confusion or poor judgment. What kind of medical evidence would be needed to support a competency challenge? She's building a case, Mrs. Martinez. The pieces were falling into place. Kaya was preparing to have me declared incompetent so she could gain control of my assets through Darren. It was an elaborate long-term strategy, and if I hadn't started investigating, it might have worked. But knowledge was power, and now I had plenty of both. It was time to move from defense to offense. The war for my family was about to enter its next phase. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after the hospital incident, Darren called me on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice strained in a way I hadn't heard since his teenage years. "Mom, can I ask you something? It's about Dad's medical records." My heart stopped for a moment. Charles had died of complications from diabetes, but his medical history was something Darren rarely discussed. "Of course, sweetheart. What do you need to know?" "Kaya's been asking a lot of questions about Dad's illness. She wants to know if it was genetic, if there were any signs of mental decline before he died, if he had any periods where his judgment might have been compromised." I felt ice forming in my veins. This was exactly what James Morrison had warned me about. Kaya was building a narrative about family history of mental incompetence. Why is she asking about this now? Darren was quiet for a long moment. "She says she's worried about James's genetic history. She wants to know what health issues might run in our family." It was a plausible cover story, but the timing was too convenient. Kaya was laying groundwork for future claims about my mental stability. "Darren, your father's mind was sharp until the day he died. His doctors can confirm that. The diabetes affected his physical health, not his cognitive abilities." That's what I thought, but Kaya seemed to think there might have been some confusion toward the end. There wasn't. Who gave her that impression? She said she'd heard it from someone, but she couldn't remember who. Of course she couldn't, because it was a lie designed to plant seeds of doubt. "Sweetheart, I have all of your father's medical records. If Kaya has genuine concerns about genetic health issues, I'd be happy to share the relevant information with James's pediatrician. That would be great, actually. Dr. Chen mentioned she'd like to have a complete family medical history. This gave me an opportunity I hadn't expected. Why don't I call Dr. Chen directly? I can provide her with everything she needs for James's records." "Would you?" "That would take a lot of pressure off Kaya. She's been really anxious about making sure we have all the right medical information." When I called Dr. Chen the next day, our conversation was illuminating. "Actually, Leona, I never requested a family medical history from Kaya. She volunteered to compile one. But when I told her the basic information she'd already provided was sufficient, she seemed disappointed." Another lie exposed. Kaya was manufacturing medical concerns to gain access to information she could use against me later. "Dr. Chen, if there are ever any real health concerns about James that require family medical history, please call me directly. I want to make sure any information provided is accurate. I'll make a note of that in his file." But Kaya's mistakes were becoming more frequent, and Darren was starting to notice the inconsistencies. The next crack appeared during what should have been a routine family dinner. I'd been invited, reluctantly, I suspected, to meet James for the first time since his birth. The invitation came with conditions, of course. Maybe just a short visit, Darren had said. Kaya's still pretty protective about James's schedule. I arrived at their house with a simple gift. A children's book that had been Darren's favorite when he was small. Kaya answered the door with James in her arms, and I got my first real look at my grandson. He was beautiful. Dark hair like Darren's, but Kaya's green eyes, He studied me with the serious expression babies get when they're taking in a new face. "He's perfect," I said softly, not reaching for him. I'd learned to let Kaya control the pace of interactions. "He's been a little fussy today," she said, though James appeared perfectly content. "I'm not sure how long he'll tolerate visitors." We settled in the living room, and I noticed immediately how the space had changed since my last visit. The family photos that had included me were gone, replaced by pictures of Kaya's family. The bookshelf that had held Charles's collection of first editions was now filled with parenting guides and lifestyle magazines. It was as if our family history was being systematically erased. "The house looks different," I commented carefully. "We're trying to make it more baby-friendly," Kaya said. Some of the older things were just collecting dust. Older things, like the antique clock Charles had inherited from his grandfather, like the paintings that had been wedding gifts from my parents, things with history and meaning, reduced to dust collectors. Darren emerged from the kitchen with coffee, and I could see the exhaustion in his face. New parent tiredness, but something more. "How are you sleeping?" I asked him. "Not much," he admitted. "James is a good baby, but Kaya's been worried about SIDS, so she checks on him every hour during the night." "Every hour?" That seemed excessive, even for a nervous new mother. "The books say you can't be too careful," Kaya said defensively. "Some babies just need more monitoring." I looked at James, who was sleeping peacefully in his carrier. He looked like a perfectly healthy, normal baby, but Kaya's constant anxiety was creating an atmosphere of crisis where none existed. "Has Dr. Chen expressed any concerns about SIDS risk?" I asked gently. "Well, no, but you can't trust doctors to catch everything," Kaya said. "I read about cases where babies seemed fine and then..." She let the sentence hang in the air, creating fear without stating anything specific. It was expertly done, and I could see how it would keep Darren in a constant state of worry. "Maybe I could help with some of the night monitoring," I offered. "I have experience with infant care, and it might give you both a chance to rest." Kaya's expression hardened immediately. "That's very kind, but James needs consistency. Too many different caregivers can be confusing for babies." Another lie. Babies benefit from multiple loving caregivers, and any pediatrician would confirm that. But then Darren surprised me. "Actually, that might be helpful, Mom. I've been worried about Kaya getting enough sleep." For a moment, Kaya looked genuinely shocked that Darren had contradicted her. She recovered quickly, but I'd seen the flash of anger in her eyes. "We'll see," she said tightly. "Maybe when James is a little older." The visit continued for another hour, and I watched the dynamics between them carefully. Darren deferred to Kaya on every decision about James, but I could see the strain it was causing. He looked like a man walking on eggshells in his own home. When James woke up and started crying, Kaya immediately tensed. "He's hungry," she announced, though it had only been an hour since his last feeding. "Are you sure?" Darren asked. "Maybe he just needs a diaper change?" "I know my own baby's cries," Kaya snapped, then caught herself. "I mean, I've been tracking his feeding schedule very carefully." But when she tried to feed him, James turned away from the bottle, clearly not hungry. The crying continued. "Let me try," Darren said, reaching for his son. "You don't do it right," Kaya said, pulling James closer to her chest. The words hung in the air like a slap. Darren's face went red, and for the first time in years, I saw real anger flash in his eyes. "What do you mean I don't do it right?" "Nothing, I'm better at calming him down." But James was crying harder now, picking up on the tension in the room. Without thinking, I stood up. "May I try?" I asked quietly. Kaya looked like she wanted to refuse, but Darren nodded before she could speak. Reluctantly, she handed me my grandson. I settled back in my chair, holding him the way I'd held Darren 33 years ago. I spoke softly, humming an old lullaby that Charles used to sing. Within minutes, James had quieted. His little body relaxed against my chest, and soon he was sleeping peacefully. The room was silent except for the soft sound of his breathing. "How did you do that?" Darren asked, wonder in his voice. "Experience," I said simply. Sometimes babies just need a different energy, a calmer presence. Kaya's face was a mask of barely controlled fury. Her expertise had been challenged, and in front of Darren, she'd been shown to be less capable than the woman she'd been working to exclude. He was probably just tired, she said dismissively. The timing was coincidental. But Darren was looking at me with something I hadn't seen in years: respect and gratitude. Mom, would you be able to babysit sometime? Just for a few hours so Kaya and I could get some rest? I'd love to, I said, still holding my peaceful grandson. Kaya opened her mouth to object, but something in Darren's expression stopped her. We'll discuss it, she said finally. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Darren was beginning to see the contradictions in Kaya's behavior. He was starting to question her absolute authority over their family. But I also knew this made Kaya more dangerous. A cornered animal fights hardest when it realizes its territory is being threatened. Sure enough, my phone rang at 11 that night. Mom, I'm sorry about tonight, Darren said, his voice tired and strained. What do you mean? Kaya's really upset. She thinks you were criticizing her parenting skills. Here it was. The guilt trip, the reframe, the way she turned every challenge to her authority into an attack that Darren needed to defend against. I wasn't criticizing anyone, sweetheart. I was just trying to help calm a crying baby. I know, but she's feeling really insecure about everything right now. Being a new mom is hard, and when someone else can do something she can't, Darren, every parent struggles with different aspects of childcare. It's not a competition, I know that, but Kaya doesn't see it that way. She thinks you're trying to prove she's not a good mother. The manipulation was elegant in its simplicity. Make every interaction about Kaya's feelings. Turn every offer of help into an attack on her competence. Force Darren to choose between supporting his wife's emotional needs and accepting help from his mother. What would you like me to do? I asked carefully. Maybe just give her some space? Let her build confidence as a mother before offering too much input. Translation: go back to being excluded and controlled, just with slightly better window dressing. Of course, I said. I want what's best for your family. But as I hung up the phone, I realized something important had shifted. For the first time in 3 years, Darren had seen Kaya be wrong about something. He'd witnessed her snap at him unfairly. He'd watched me succeed where she had failed. The cracks in her facade were widening. And despite her attempts to control the narrative, Darren was beginning to see through the manipulation. The next phase of my plan was about to begin. The endgame came sooner than I expected, triggered by Kaya's own overconfidence. 2 weeks after the babysitting conversation, she made a crucial mistake. She called me directly, without Darren's knowledge, and revealed more about her true nature than she intended. Leona, we need to talk, she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. Can you meet me for lunch today? I agreed, curious about what angle she was planning to work next. We met at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place Kaya loved to be seen in. She arrived 15 minutes late, a power play I recognized immediately. Thank you for meeting me, she said, settling into her chair with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. I wanted to discuss some concerns I have about your relationship with Darren and James. What kind of concerns? She pulled out her phone and opened a note app, as if she'd prepared talking points. I've been doing some research about family dynamics and healthy boundaries. I think it would be best for everyone if we established some clearer guidelines about your involvement in our lives. The audacity was breathtaking. She was actually going to present me with rules about my relationship with my own son. What kind of guidelines? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Well, for starters, I think visits should be scheduled in advance and limited to once a month. James needs routine, and too much disruption isn't healthy for him. Once a month. She was rationing my access to my own family. I also think it would be better if gifts went through Darren and me first. We want to make sure everything fits with our parenting philosophy. Translation: she wanted veto power over how I expressed love for my grandson. And I've been concerned about some of the stories you've been telling Darren about his father. I think it might be healthier if we focused on the present instead of dwelling on the past. This was the most revealing statement yet. She wanted to control not just my future relationship with my family, but also Darren's understanding of his own history. What stories are you referring to? Just some of the medical information you provided. Darren mentioned that you said his father never had any cognitive issues, but I've heard differently from other sources. What sources? Kaya waved her hand dismissively. People talk, you know. Small town. I just think it's important that we have accurate information, especially when it comes to genetic health risks for James. She was doubling down on the lie about Charles's mental state, even when confronted directly. But more importantly, she was revealing her strategy. Rewrite family history to support whatever narrative served her purposes. Kaya, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Actually, she interrupted, there's one more thing. I know this might be difficult to hear, but Darren and I have been discussing your financial situation. My blood went cold. My financial situation? We're concerned that you might be taken advantage of, given your age and the complexity of managing the hospital and your investments. We think it might be time to consider having someone help you with those decisions. There it was. The real agenda. She wasn't just trying to control my access to my family. She was making a play for control of my assets. That's very thoughtful, I said carefully. Have you discussed this with Darren's financial advisor? Well, no, but we think it might be better to work with someone who understands the family dynamics better. Someone who could coordinate between your needs and ours. Someone she could control. Someone who would make decisions that benefited her rather than me. I'd heard enough. It was time to end this charade. Kaya, I appreciate your concern, but I think there are some things you should know before we continue this conversation. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I'd prepared for this moment. First, regarding Charles's medical history. These are his complete medical records from the last 5 years of his life. You'll notice there's no documentation of any cognitive decline or mental incompetence. His doctor's notes consistently describe him as alert, oriented, and fully capable of making complex decisions right up until his death. Kaya's confident expression faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. Second, regarding my financial situation, I think you might be operating under some misconceptions about my capabilities. I pulled out the next set of documents. These are the quarterly reports from the hospital's board of directors. As you can see, under my leadership, we've expanded to 3 new facilities, increased our endowment by 40%, and maintained the highest patient satisfaction ratings in the state. I also sit on the boards of 2 other medical systems and chair the Regional Healthcare Planning Committee. The color was draining from Kaya's face, but I wasn't finished. Third, regarding your background research on family dynamics, I've done some research of my own. I placed a photograph on the table. It showed Kaya leaving the office of an estate planning attorney I knew specialized in elder law disputes. This was taken last Tuesday. According to my sources, you spent 2 hours discussing strategies for challenging mental competency determinations and gaining financial power of attorney for elderly family members. Kaya stared at the photo, her mouth opening and closing without sound. I also have documentation of your meetings with 3 other attorneys, your research into my financial assets, and your attempts to gather medical information that could be used to support a competency challenge. I leaned forward, my voice deadly quiet. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I was too old or too trusting to see what you were doing? Kaya found her voice, but it was shaky now. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I know about Mrs. Chen, I said simply. The effect was immediate. Kaya went completely pale, her hands trembling as she reached for her water glass. I know about the will change, the $40,000, and the pattern of targeting elderly people for financial gain. I know about your real employment history, your fabricated education, and your family's actual financial situation. Kaya was silent, staring at the table. I also know about your visits to James's pediatrician under false pretenses, your lies about family medical history, and your attempts to manufacture health crises to control Darren's behavior. I gathered the documents and put them back in my folder. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop lying about my family's medical history. You're going to stop trying to limit my access to my son and grandson. And you're going to abandon whatever scheme you had planned regarding my financial affairs." Kaya finally looked up, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Fear. "And if I don't? Then I share this information with Darren. All of it, including the real reason you've been trying to isolate him from me." We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Kaya's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it, and her face went white. "What's wrong?" I asked. It's Darren. He wants me to come home immediately. He says we need to talk." I felt a cold satisfaction. "You should probably go then." As she gathered her things with shaking hands, I added one final thought. "Kaya, you made one crucial miscalculation in all of this. You assumed that because I loved my son, I would be weak. You confused kindness with vulnerability. That was your mistake." She left without another word. I sat in the restaurant for another hour, sipping my coffee and watching the city move past the windows. My phone rang twice, Kaya's number, but I didn't answer. Whatever was happening at their house, she would have to handle it without my help. Finally, Darren called. "Mom, can you come over? We need to talk. All of us." "Are you sure that's what you want?" "I'm sure. There are some things I need to understand." When I arrived at their house, I found Darren in the living room holding James, while Kaya sat on the opposite side of the room, her eyes red from crying. "Mom, sit down," Darren said quietly. "I've been asking Kaya some questions about things that haven't been making sense to me." I took a seat, saying nothing. "She told me about your lunch conversation today, about the research you've done. She also admitted to some things she's been hiding from me." Kaya spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for it to go this far." "What exactly has gone too far?" Darren asked, his voice hard in a way I'd never heard before. "The attorneys, the research into your mother's finances. I thought if we could just get some control over the family money, we could make sure James had the best opportunities. By lying about my father's medical condition? By trying to have my mother declared incompetent?" Kaya flinched. "It wasn't supposed to be like that. I just wanted security for our family." "Our family includes my mother," Darren said firmly. "She's James's grandmother. She's the woman who raised me and built everything we've benefited from. And you've been systematically trying to destroy her relationship with us." He stood up, still holding James, and moved to sit beside me. "Mom, I owe you an apology. A huge one. I've let my marriage become more important than my family, and I've allowed someone to manipulate me into hurting the person who's always been there for me." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Darren, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do. I need to say this. You've never been anything but supportive and loving. When Dad died, you held our family together. When I needed help with college, with my career, with anything, you were there. And I let someone convince me that your love was somehow toxic or controlling." He looked at Kaya, who was crying silently. "I think we need some time apart. Both of us need to figure out what we really want from this marriage." "Darren, please," Kaya whispered. "We can work this out. I can change." "I don't know if you can," he said sadly. "And I don't know if I can trust you to try." He turned back to me. "Mom, would it be all right if James and I stayed with you for a while? Just until I can figure out what comes next?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and kind, who'd temporarily lost his way but found his strength again. And I looked at my grandson, innocent of all these adult complications, who deserved to grow up surrounded by genuine love. "You're always welcome in my home," I said, "both of you." 3 months later, Darren filed for divorce. Kaya fought it initially, trying to claim a share of assets she'd never contributed to, but the evidence of her deception was overwhelming. She settled for a modest support payment and minimal custody rights. James took his first steps in my living room, with Darren and me cheering him on. We established new traditions: Sunday morning pancakes, evening walks around the garden, bedtime stories read by grandfather's chair. Darren dated occasionally, but he was cautious now. He'd learned to see through manipulation, to value authenticity over charm. I want to find someone who loves us both, he told me one evening as we watched James play with his blocks. Someone who sees you as an addition to our family, not a threat to subtract from it. As for me, I finally felt like myself again. The woman who'd built a medical empire, raised a good man, and protected her family from those who would exploit them. Kaya sent a card on James's first birthday. Inside she'd written, "I hope someday you'll understand that I only wanted what was best for my family." I threw it away without showing it to Darren. Some lies weren't worth preserving, even for the sake of peace. James called me Nana for the first time on a Tuesday afternoon in October. It was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. And when my grandson looked at me with his bright green eyes, I saw not just love, but the secure knowledge that he would grow up surrounded by people who truly cherished him. That was worth fighting for. That was worth everything. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.